Hello, students. Welcome again to another lesson in science. And this week's topic is a very important topic for us all. We've been discussing in the past about fossil fuels and energy, and this topic is a great follow-up to the previous topic. This week, we are going to be talking about conservation. We'll be watching a number of videos this week in addition to the video lesson here, but we'll be watching some videos and gathering some information and doing a pretty cool lab activity later this week to help us understand the principles of conservation a little bit better than what we may now. So let's begin with what the word actually means in the first place. The word conservation describes the wise use of natural resources. We've learned about some natural resources. I think we have a pretty good idea of what those resources are. But if we overuse them and abuse them, we won't have them to use in the future. And that's the way with anything. I mean, how many times have maybe your parents asked you to put your clothes away, to clean up after yourselves, to clean up the dishes, to do your chores around the house? You know, they don't ask you these things just to annoy you. And I know you might be annoyed by being asked to do these things at times, but taking care of your things is a wise use of those resources. Imagine if you never did laundry. Your clothes would eventually fall apart because of the stench and filth that would permeate them. It's important to take care of your clothes. What if you never brushed your teeth? There's an old saying, ignore your teeth and they'll go away. Think about that for a moment. You should be wisely using the natural resource of your own teeth and your own body. If you don't care for yourself, well, you could get diseases. You could start literally falling apart. And it's the same with natural resources, folks. The natural resources that we rely upon every day of our lives, we have to make sure that we use them wisely, because if we don't, we won't have them to use in the future. So as we continue this topic of conservation, I want you to think about what it really means, because this is a topic that we can live individually and collectively as a community. It's not something to just learn about, it's something to actually do. So, conservation can help us prevent the depletion of our resources, and it can help prevent polluting those resources. After all, here we're very fortunate. I have a bottle of pure life water. But imagine if this water were not clean. Imagine if we didn't have clean resources. Did you know that there are some folks in the world that get their drinking water from river water that is also used for bathing and toileting? Think about that for a moment. Would you like to dip your water bottle into your toilet bowl and not having flushed beforehand? That's the state of the world that a large percentage of the people on our planet face every day. Or in order to get a clean bottle of water, you have to hike miles in order to find a somewhat clean water source. We are very fortunate, and you can be very thankful that we have such a ready supply of clean water in the country we live in. Not everyone is so fortunate. But if we want to maintain that level of cleanliness, then we have to use our resources wisely. and we have to promote something called sustainability. Sustainability, which we'll be talking about at greater length, is essentially something we can do to make sure that we always have the resources that we need to breathe, to drink, to eat, to wear, all of the resources that we rely upon each and every day without running out of them and without polluting them. It's really quite a simple concept. Unfortunately, it's one that many folks have forgotten. So let's now talk about some of our natural resources here. Natural resources describe the materials taken from the earth and used by us, human beings, people of the planet. We all depend upon various resources. They can include water that we use for producing energy, like in hydroelectric power plants, or for drinking, which we can't live for very long without. We rely on oil beneath the ground for energy and for fuel. We rely on our forests of the world for wood, for food, for medicine, for pulp, which we make paper from. Ooh, that's a foreshadowing of an activity later in the week. For habitat, for wildlife, for rubber, for cotton, for our clothing. We rely on the forests and plants of the world. We rely on rocks and minerals for construction, for shelter, for even fun things like jewelry and attire. We rely on the minerals as well for glass and for cans and ceramics. We rely on the soil, which we've learned about in the past, for agriculture. Hey, who doesn't like to eat? We all need to eat. Without soil, we're not growing any plants to eat. Soil is perhaps one of the most important natural resources for everybody. For the animals of the world, we rely on for food and protection and recreation and for the wool on certain species as well. Bottom line is there's an awful lot of things, both living and non-living, that we consider natural resources. But there's a distinction between the resources of planet Earth, an important distinction that we have to remember, especially in the context of this topic on conservation. You see, some resources are non-renewable. They can't be replaced, at least not within a human lifetime. These resources include the fossil fuels we've learned about already, the minerals that we've learned about. These non-renewable resources, once we use them up, that's it. We can't really manufacture new supplies of fossil fuels, for instance. Yes, in various places of the world, if the conditions are right, there might be new deposits of coal being made, but it takes eons of time. It takes time beyond the human lifespan. And so, for all practical purposes, renewable resources and non-renewable resources are quite different. Non-renewable resources cannot be replaced within a human lifetime. Renewable resources, however, can be replaced. Renewable resources include such things as wood, water, and biomass. These are things that can be replaced if we use them wisely. Think of wood, for instance. There was a time not that long ago that we would be chopping down trees just as fast as you please, and that actually beckons me to to start reciting lines from the Lorax, but we'll talk about the Lorax later this week. But anyway, think of the forests of the world. The forests, when we need wood, we need pulp for paper, we need land to grow things. We can chop down trees. Yeah, and we can use the trees. No, nothing wrong with that. But if we don't replant trees there or somewhere else, eventually that renewable resource becomes depleted. But if we use them wisely and remember that, hey, if we cut down a tree and then plant a tree in its place, then that tree will be there for the next generation. And that's a good thing. That's wisely using renewable resources. Or cleaning the water before we dump it out into the rivers and lakes so as not to pollute it. That's a wise use of that renewable resource. You don't want to be flushing your toilet right into the neighborhood pond and then go fishing in it for dinner. That would be disgusting. That is not a wise use of that resource. So keep in mind that renewable resources will be continuously replaced and renewed as long as we use them wisely. Just clean up after yourself and everything will be hunky-dory, if you know what I mean. But resources, whether they're renewable or non-renewable, we use them. In science, we call that consumption. Consumption is the human use of natural resources. And there are many different levels of human use of natural resources. Some resources we use more than others, and some cultures use them more than others. Some nations or regions of the world use resources or consume resources at a much higher rate than other cultures around the world. And we will have time to explore that and talk about that a little bit more. But let's look at this next slide here, for instance. Consumption is typically related to population size. And I think that probably should make sense to you. After all, if you were in the cafeteria today all by yourself, there's only so much food you could eat. You would consume maybe a tray or two of the school's lunch. But how many trays of lunch are consumed when the whole cafeteria is filled? I would imagine a lot more. Why? Because it's a bigger population of students. If you look at this graph here, you can see over time, as population increases, so has the use of different resources. And we can see on this particular graph, it has been broken into different kinds of resources, like construction materials. Construction materials in the purple zone here has gone up markedly. After all, we all need some place to live. We need some place to park and drive our vehicles. That all is incorporated into the construction resources that we draw upon. Look at the energy resources. Energy resources have increased as well as the population also increases. It's logical that the more people there are in an area, the more resources we are going to depend upon. But remember the difference between renewable and non-renewable resources, and whether there are things that we can do to minimize our use, even though our population is increasing. We can increase efficient use of these things. We can increase our wisdom in how to use these things. Consumption is also related to the resource demand. That means, let me think of an example. How many of you have ever seen advertisements or commercials for products. Yeah. Have you ever seen a commercial or ad for a particular product that you just had to have because everybody else has one? You know, the demand for certain resources can be controlled. You may not have to have that latest pair of pants that has half of the material missing because it's all ripped up. You may not have to have that latest pair of sneakers because it's endorsed by a famous athlete. You may want those things, but you may not need those things in order to survive. There is a difference between a want and a need. And no, I'm not trying to lecture you like your mom or your dad that you don't have to have certain things. I'm strictly talking to you as your science teacher and whether you really need to have certain things or not. Because the world is full of these resources that you can be convinced by advertising that you must have. And we don't have to have certain things. But there are resources that we can use and require less of if we start utilizing other kinds of resources. Because here's the bottom line, folks. Here's an excellent equation for you to circle in your books after you've written it down. When consumption, whatever resource it might be, is greater than, that's the little greater than sign, when consumption is greater than the resource itself, that can equal only one thing. And what that equals is depletion, the depletion of the resource. When consumption is greater than the resource, it can only equal one thing: depletion. And when you deplete a resource, if it's a non-renewable source and you deplete it, you never get it back again. If it's a renewable resource that you've depleted, you may have a really tough time getting it back again to the same state that you wish it to be. It may be too polluted or too far gone for you to get it back again, at least within your lifetime. So I'm going to end today with this heavy thought that when consumption is greater than a resource, it equals depletion. I'll be showing you some other videos today to drive home this point, but until tomorrow, I'm going to say bye-bye.